Well, all right, it's the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and begin. My name is Jerry Manter, Marketing and Communications Specialist here at Zazio. Leading today's virtual coffee with consulting will be Rick Serber and Jennifer Chadban, Senior Consultants. A couple quick notes for today. We have a few poll questions planned, so we invite you to participate to help drive the conversation. And if you have any questions, please submit them via the questions panel as we will dedicate some time at the end for a Q&A discussion. And there does seem to be a little bug with the chat feature. So if it isn't showing up on your display, feel free to drop your comment in the questions panel. We would also like to invite you to take our survey at the end. Let us know how we did today, and please share any topic suggestions for any future virtual copy sessions. And that is all from me. I'll now hand things off to Jen and see you guys back for the Q&A. Jen.
Great. Thanks so much, Jerry. Appreciate it. Welcome everybody to Virtual Coffee. Hopefully you're experiencing some pleasant spring weather. I know we are here in Boise. We've got a great session planned for today on AI records, AI non-records, and I think we're really excited about this. I think in our industry, it's every...
Oh, Jen, you just dropped your mic. Yep, that's better.
Sorry. I was saying, I think every 5 to 10 years, maybe we have something huge happen. And I certainly think the AI records has been one of those topics. We've gotten a lot of questions and there's a lot of movement, a lot of things going on with it. So we're really excited to have that conversation today. Going over our guest list, I know we saw a lot of familiar names and new ones as well. So for anybody who hasn't joined Virtual Coffee before, we have just a few rules. Keep it casual. We welcome interaction. Hop in at any time. You can drop in the questions box, ask questions. And also, hopefully you have coffee or whatever your drink of choice is, whether it be Diet Coke or, whatever that might be, water. But yeah, we've got a great session planned for today. So with that, why don't we get started here? And we thought that we'd like to kind of start things off getting into a little bit of a roadmap here, but a bit of an icebreaker here. And we want to hear from you all. What are some common AI records that you are dealing with, your organization is dealing at the moment? As Jerry mentioned, I think the chat feature might not be showing up, but the questions box is fully functioning. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of dropping into the questions box some of your answers, the types of AI records that you are dealing with in your organization, we'd love to see that. Awesome. I've got some info flowing in. We see chat GPT prompts. That's a great one. Thank you so much for that. Copilot, it's a real there's a lot there in Copilot. So yeah, that's a great one. Prompts and retention and record series. Absolutely. These are all really great examples. So yeah, perfect. We're going to talk about all these things and more. So really today's session is kind of a quiz-based approach to records management in AI-enabled workflows. And so I hope everybody's kind of feeling up for it because we've got several discussion questions, and then also we're going to do 4 formal quiz poll questions, and we're going to poll the audience and see just how things are progressing. It's not going to be a test per se, but it'll definitely be on some of the topics that we're talking about to just kind of gauge where we are and get input from everybody and see how see what things look like. And so, for Virtual Coffee, we always like to have these slide decks because I think visuals are great. They keep things interesting. It's something to take away. It's a great way to kind of like guide our conversation too. And for today, I think just a kind of overview of the main topics we hope to discuss, we're going to be talking about some of these key records retention schedule principles for AI records. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the laws and also the business operations, the processes that are driving the generation of these AI records and actually non-records too, to that point. And then, of course, importantly, I think, how do we categorize these AI records into the records retention schedule? In some cases, the non-AI records might not live in the retention schedule, but we're going to get into a little bit of the details as to what that actually kind of looks like. What are the types of categories we're seeing in records retention schedules, whether existing or new ones? So with that, I did say this would be kind of a quiz format, but we do have our first formal poll question. And so we want to poll the audience on this and just kind of see where everybody's at. And so we have an AI generated summary of revenue performance trends that is shared internally by email, which best describes them. And I'll hand this over to Rick as he formally kind of polls the audience. Let's see what our responses look like, everybody.
Getting some good responses in. Yeah, the results are pouring in quickly. This is a tough one, so yeah, gonna go ahead and end the poll right now and share the results. And yeah, hopefully everyone can see that. I think that yeah, everyone is on the right track here. I think it depends is probably the best answer. I think the determining factor in our minds is how that summary is used. Is it the official record of the analysis? Is it the basis for a decision? Or is it just kind of, like a casual recap for reference purposes? And I think it's important to emphasize here, the same content can be a record in one context and a non-record in another. Context really drives the status. And this is really going to be the foundation of the principles that we go over. We're going to dig into that depends answer and try to provide a good framework to define it during this presentation.
Yeah, great. And we had a comment that I thought was really great here. For most government entities, the individual noted that the definition of record is much more broad. So I think that's a great point. And again, kind of going to that context of how you're regulated, what your policies are, what the typical business and process flows look like. So great comment there.
I really love that comment because it reinforces something that we're going to talk about today, which is keep your existing framework. AI doesn't require a new framework. Instead, it calls for disciplined application of the existing retention schedule to new types of records. And then at the same time, it also requires that you apply your definition of a record, however you may be defining it, to each of these AI outputs. So it's really discipline that matters more than novelty when applying retention to AI and its outputs. I think one thing to caution that we have seen coming up a little bit is to avoid creating overly broad AI records categories. Instead, do what you do with all new pieces of information that you're trying to appraise and determine whether they meet the definition of a record. Apply it to the underlying business purpose. Understand, what's going on with that and whether it rises to the level of that definition. These catch-all AI categories tend to lead to consistency, over-retention, and some difficulties, with audits and so forth. So when AI is used in regulated or high-risk activities, our recommendation is a conservative retention practice. I think it already probably is this way in the way that everyone is defining records, but when those high-risk activities are happening, we lean a little bit more on the it's probably a record side of things. And then we also keep those strong controls for those high-risk activities. Yeah, so just erring on the side of categorizing AI borderline content, as records and matching them with the category within your records retention schedule is what we're seeing as best practice right now.
Well, great. Well, let's get kind of transitioned over here to what we're calling discussion scenarios. And this is another interactive opportunity here for everybody to engage. If you want to drop some responses here into the question box. So our scenario is an internal AI tool generates a written recommendation that helps the team decide how to prioritize work for the next quarter. The recommendation is reviewed in a meeting, but only the final decision is documented elsewhere. So let's see. Our question is the AI generated recommendation a record? Feel free to drop your response in the questions box and we can discuss.
Don't be shy.
Okay, we've got a yes. It's used by the agency to make a decision. We've got some no's. No, it's reference material. Yes, because it's a significant draft or similar. These are really great responses. All right. Okay. Well, let's see here. So again, I think it's just kind of perfect. Again, we've got, it depends. I promise we'll transition away from some of these trickier ones, but I think it's really great to showcase. I think all the answers are really illustrating the fact that, yeah, it does depend. So we saw some of these comments said, this would constitute a significant draft or something similar. Therefore, it would rise to that level of a record. Depends on how the organization views background or preliminary records. I think absolutely. Somebody else noting, well, it is a reference material. So I think some of these comments that we're seeing are bringing into context even individual organizations' views on how they might define records in different ways. And so, to the extent this does constitute something that is, you know, really illustrates or has information that supports the final decision, I think it would be reasonable to call it a record. But if it really is just kind of a draft and the formal decision is documented elsewhere, it doesn't provide any, essential context or whatnot, it could be construed as a non-record. So in this case, maybe more information would be helpful for us to make that determination. But as it stands, I think it depends, and great answers, everybody. I think we're kind of right where we should be. But this does kind of bring us a little bit more into that arena. When is AI information or AI records, AI data, when is it considered a record? So we've seen kind of how tricky it can be to classify a single item, but let's kind of step back a little bit, look at the bigger picture, and consider that question. What makes AI a record? And so the key point number one, I think this came through in the responses. Does it support a business decision? It could be to support an agency decision, organized decision. Does it support these types of aspects? But also, I think getting to the system itself, we're thinking about, does it document the AI design, the training configuration? So talking about that AI in and of itself. So this kind of covers, I think, the behind the scenes aspects or artifacts. So the model training documentation, the configuration. At the end of the day, these are kind of considered critical for accountability. So if an AI system produces kind of like a flawed outfit or there's an issue, organizations need to go back and trace how that system was built, how it was configured, what went wrong. And so kind of an example of this is an AI model's training data log or a record of the parameters used when deploying a customer-facing questions bot. Let's say the questions bot starts spewing out really ridiculous answers to customers' questions. Well, we need to kind of go back and be able to trace within the AI system, what went wrong. And that could have regulatory implications. It could also just have very important business or organizational implications, because maybe that AI system is considered really essential. This other point here, I think, which everybody has a pretty good grasp on just from gauging the responses we're seeing, but does it support the business decision, an organizational agency decision, regulated processes, or compliance? And so this is similar to, any other types of content we have in an organization. Let's say it's just non-AI content, and we're trying to make that determination of a record. But if it does influence a business decision, like let's say it's hiring, let's say it's lending, let's say it's procurement, any of the essential kind of organizational business decisions that are made, or it's specifically regulated within like a sector specific regulation, it's just, it amounts to a record that would have to be required to be retained. So it, in this context, that type of AI record would essentially, inherit the retention period of the regulation. And so these are, I think a good way to say or think about this is if someone asked, why did your organization make this decision? And the answer involves AI, you should be able to show the trail or the records that relate to that. And finally, this is kind of something to think about, but if AI information explains, exactly how an output was generated, or it's covered by retention rules, fair to say that it would rise to the level of record. So this is really kind of about being able to explain, about transparency, audit logs, prompt histories, and we'll get a little bit more into some of these emerging regulations that expressly kind of require this sort of information that provides transparency into how AI outputs are being generated. And so it's a little bit distinct. You might kind of look back to the first point and think this is the same, but the first going more to the system, and the latter being more kind of a regulatory, transparency, accountability aspect. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And so these are really kind of the, some main pillars to think about when we want to think about what is an AI record, and they really kind of all come back to this concept, I think, of accountability. But let's get into discussion scenario number 2, and I'll hand this one over to you, Rick, to get started.
All right, so use that question box again. Feel free to comment. An employee uses an internal AI tool to draft a rough email response. Text is edited, never shared externally, and the final message is rewritten manually. What does everyone think? Is this an AI record? Getting a lot of no's. I've got a yes, but it's transient. Lots of no's, overwhelmingly no's. Yep, and I think you're onto it. Our next part of this webinar is to kind of talk about what's a non-record, and if the draft was never used, never sent, no lasting business value beyond a starting point, probably doesn't rise to the level of a record. Didn't influence a decision, discarded entirely in this case. And so I think this is more of an initial draft, when we're talking about meeting the definition of record. And we just want to kind of reinforce here that as a draft and really as a non-record, we want to try to delete these things pretty quickly, right? Depending on what your policy says, probably a pretty short life of it. I think about it a little bit as, AI is a really good way to kind of get the creative juices flowing and start the writing process. For those of us who have a little bit of writer's block and don't know where to start, it can give you some ideas. But if those ideas are ultimately, replaced by your own and rewritten and not the basis for what you end up writing, that's exactly what it is. It's just kind of a prompt to help you get started. And so let's define the boundary from that scenario. Non-records don't have lasting business value, regardless of whether AI created them. So, I mean, we're going to go back to your governance rules in the definition of a record, non-record here again. Temporary prompts and tests, convenience copies of information stored elsewhere, maybe drafts not used as decisions, all likely qualify as non-records, based on your definitions. Um, Personal or administrative in nature still applies in the AI context. It's the same rules that we use new content type here with AI. I think it's really important to emphasize that non-records should be, again, following your policy that hopefully says this, deleted relatively quickly, to avoid them becoming rot and kind of clogging the system with things that we don't need anymore. So.
Well, great. Okay, with that, we are going to kind of see how things are moving along with another formal poll question. So Rick's going to go ahead and run this poll for us. Scenario is an organization uses AI to support an outcome that is subject to legal or regulatory scrutiny. Several months later, the decision is questioned. So when the AI-assisted decision is questioned later, what will regulatory or regulators expect the organization to show?
While we're looking at that, we've got a question. What's a temporary prompt? I was thinking more along the lines of something that is replaced by a better prompt. As you're trying to build your prompts and testing what is working and what's not working, there are usually several iterations that can come up in my experience. And so one of those kind of replaced or superseded prompts would be something that I would consider to be, temporary in nature.
All right, where are we landing on this?
Okay, go ahead and end the poll and share the results here.
All right. So, did you close the poll, Rick?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So it looks like then our final, we got 69% of people saying reconstruct how the decision was made using records. And that is the correct response. And I think, a good way to think about this is when we're talking about compliance related or regulated types of AI records, it is kind of about that aspect of transparency and accountability that we talked about. So the expectation would be the ability to reconstruct how the outcome was produced using the documented records. Not to say that some of these other aspects might be, come into question. The internal policy is a bit more, I think, about an internal compliance obligation, rather external regulatory expectation, but I think it could still go to demonstrate compliance. So it's not necessarily wrong. I just think the best response would be C. So nice job, everybody. I think we're coming along quite well.
And
So
along that, we've got a question. If the AI response was reviewed for accuracy, would that change the question? And I think it could potentially. Then it potentially gets more into an audit type record that is confirming accuracy and maybe revising something, revising a prompt to try to make it better. That could meet the definition of one of your audit categories potentially. So good question.
all right. Well, I want to kind of dig into this, the AI governance and compliance aspect and kind of why these laws matter for records, specifically some of these AI records. And I think we talked about what counts as a record, what doesn't count, but let's kind of zoom out, I think, and ask this bigger question, why does this all matter? And, in a lot of cases, it's because the law says it matters. But, thinking about some of these pillars here and these key points, AI rules expect organizations to show how it's used, it's built, it's monitored. And, the AI governance laws increasingly are requiring organizations to kind of document every stage of the AI lifecycle, from the design, training, the maintenance of it, the deployment, how is it being monitored, all of the decision making that goes along with it. I kind of think of this as being like a food label and something a little bit more tangible if we think about it that way. They want to know, regulators want to know what went in to the food, how it's processed and what came out. And so, how it's distributed, where it's distributed. So this same kind of logic now applies to AI systems as well. And then another kind of part to this is proving compliance. And so it does take the records. It's not just the tools. I think, especially when initially this came out, we were really thinking about the systems themselves rather than the documentation of the system. So the compliance isn't just through, it's not just about the code, it's not but the technology. You can't just say our AI is compliant. You really have to prove that with documentations. And so organizations do have to maintain, records, uh, as evidence of compliance, as evidence of accountability, and that, just demonstrate that they're kind of have control over their AI systems. And so I think this is actually a point that's really essential, where we would see records management teams becoming essential partners, again, reinforcing those relationships with IT and legal. It's just a kind of another aspect that we would see that kind of underscores that those important partnerships. And we also kind of see how this does mean that we're keeping more AI related materials. The requirements are requiring and kind of outlining documentation in detail that needs to be retained. I think the best law that we could maybe, and that maybe the most detailed that folks might be familiar with, is the EU AI Act. So it's not just really about like the final reports or the approvals. It's now really detailed, records about the system documentation, the outputs, metadata, logs, validation. And so for records managers, I think we might want to think about it as a challenge, but an opportunity as well. The volume of the information is growing, but so is, I think, the strategic importance of our role in maintaining that. And this is, of course, in light of everything that, digitization and explosion of information records as we have it, let's add AI to the mix and just keep it really interesting. And that is the case. And so some of the common regulatory themes really we're seeing is, as we kind of talked about, you're going to hear some of these terms over and over again, but transparency, accountability. One thing we haven't talked about yet is humans. Yes, we're still important. There is a human oversight aspect, and with certain types of high risk AI systems, more and more that's important. Documenting human touch points as part of the oversight in these processes can be an important component. And, each of these pillars that we're talking about here, they all kind of generate their own records. So really kind of expanding what we might have traditionally thought of, being locked into the systems and the technology. There's so much more to it. A lot more for us to just kind of keep our arms wrapped around and figure out how do we manage this information, and how do we categorize it, how do we manage it throughout its life cycle through disposition, and what does this look like. So the legal landscape certainly is moving fast, but really I think the core message is simple. If your organization is using AI, the law expects you to be able to show your work. And so records management certainly is, I think, a really important mechanism to make sure that that happens. And I do want to share this, and this is a really beautiful map. And I'll let Rick go into this just a little bit more detail about, what are the specific laws and the variety, and kind of what we're seeing, an overview of what that looks like.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And so some interesting stats that we found, if you click, Jen, to provide them, 70 plus binding rules, or 70 plus countries with binding rules that relate to AI. 170 with some form of AI policy activity. So, I mean, this is evolving really quickly. In some ways, it reminds me a lot of how privacy laws evolved.
Hmm.
And the way that it's evolving is kind of similar as well, with a lot of ground being made in the EU. But I mean, other jurisdictions as well, like China, are coming up with their own laws as well. For the US, again, like with privacy, it's a patchwork of state requirements. And I think that the designated color there for the United States is an average. I think that if we were to see that played out state by state, some states like California would have them, would be a darker shade. Others wouldn't have any shade. And so for California, the AI Transparency Act, it requires AI system providers to implement detection tools, disclose information about AI generated content. Um, Texas has a requirement when consumers interact with AI systems, prohibits certain uses of AI that could lead to discrimination. Utah has an act that businesses disclose use of AI in high risk contexts. And so I did a search of our internal citation database, Versatile, and I found 176 citations that reference AI. A dozen or so have express record keeping requirements related to AI records. Um, all are based on the content of the records produced. And I think the EU AI Act that Jen mentioned is a good one to talk about really quickly. It's got some express record keeping requirements related to what it terms high risk systems. And so these are systems related to sensitive areas like healthcare, employment, finance, law enforcement, critical infrastructure. And those will likely all have their own place within your records retention schedule. So none of this that we're discussing breaks that rule that we talked about, that your big bucket, process-based functional retention schedule is likely to handle all of this. And a lot of those records that are already regulated specifically, like healthcare, employment, will be regulated similarly on the AI side. And the retention periods seem to align pretty well with what we've already got. So.
All right. Well, with that, I hope everybody is ready for another formal quiz poll question. Rick is going to go ahead and run this for us. But the scenario is a team saves AI configuration documentation for routine or internal use. Is this an AI record? Let's see what you all think.
Careful, we might be trying to trick you here.
It
What
is
would be
kind of
the
tricky.
what would be the fun in all of the answers saying it depends? Let me just hint that. Getting some good responses in. Maybe give it another few seconds before we share the results. Okay. The results are live.
All right. So we had the majority of folks saying that it is an AI record. Runner up would be the it depends. And I'm not going to say that it depends is wrong. I think maybe the better answer here, just based on the information that we have, is that it more likely is an AI record. I guess what's missing here is we don't say like final or formal configuration documentation. I mean, there's always the case that it could be, you know, draft or transitory or superseded or something like that. But in this context, I think one of the things we want to maybe reinforce here is that it says routine internal use. And one thing that we tend to think about, and we're talking about these laws and differentiating between AI systems that might be regulated and those that may not be technically regulated. Nonetheless, I think, your organization is developing AI, even if it is kind of just for internal use. Those records or that information that supports the system, still would be considered a record that has ongoing value, business value, and should be maintained. And we might think of that in the context of, a general, your IT, if you have a category that relates to systems records, that's maybe where this would fit. So those different kind of operational records for the AI system, even if they're kind of routine business in nature, if it rises to that level of what we might typically be considered a record, then I think that's something that would need to be retained and considered a record. But certainly, yes, there's some kind of it depend aspects that could play into that sort of question. So, but yeah, good job, everybody. I think that was pretty good. And yeah, talking a little bit more, I think, and about these laws that might be considered more sector specific. We talked about these kind of big overarching AI type laws, that might be at the national, or, some might be a little bit more specific at the state level, for example. But here's one law, and we'll talk about it in other contexts too for other industries. But 21 CFR Part 11 is an FDA requirement that applies to entities that might be regulated under the FDA in certain contexts, and it does require electronic records and signatures to be trustworthy, reliable, and equivalent to paper records. And so here's kind of an example of an existing law that, although it doesn't specifically at this point in time, speak to AI systems, it does implicate AI systems where they are used in regulated activities, such as those regulated at the FDA. They would fall under Part 11 if they, to the extent that they support decision submissions or quality processes. And so the AI systems in scope of this particular requirement, they would have to have system validation, audit trails. It does get into those record level details of things that could be required. And this also kind of goes to supporting the AI generated outputs used for the regulated decisions, which are regulated records, metadata logs, system configuration and information. And so, this is a law that isn't necessarily unique. It's in scope compared to other jurisdictions. There are international equivalents. The EU also has a requirement that might even be a little bit more broad than this. And so there, for the industry, there are similar requirements across other jurisdictions. But it's not even just in, this sector necessarily. We might think of this in the context of finance. So think about Sarbanes-Oxley, Section 802, requiring public companies to retain audit work papers and financial records with integrity controls. Like Part 11, the focus is ensuring that the records are trustworthy, tamper evident, retained. This could implicate AI records as well. HIPAA, let's think about HIPAA security rules. SEC 17A4 related to securities, and obligations to preserve electronic records in non-rewritable, non-erasable format. So again, these are kind of just examples of these existing laws that, based on the principles that they require in ensuring trustworthy, reliable, equivalent, records, to the extent that AI systems are supporting the generation of these records, they may be called into question or subject to these regulatory requirements. And so they're kind of this universal language of records compliance. So whether you're in pharma, healthcare, environmental regulations, regulators essentially are expecting these same fundamental controls. And so organizations that, build these, for example, have a really strong Part 11 foundation, they're really already kind of well positioned for demonstrating compliance across other frameworks as well. So didn't want to get too far into the weeds on all of these different ones, but I thought it would be great to talk about one of these specific requirements, to just give a real world. This is a regulation, for example, we may already be dealing with, and this is how it implicates AI records potentially. So with that, let's dig into another discussion scenario. So we've got here, an AI system generates a result that is reviewed and relied upon to support a regulated quality decision. The result is saved, but the system does not retain model version information, audit logs, or validation evidence. So let's test our knowledge, just giving this example, having talked about 21 CFR, under 21 CFR Part 11, which requirement is most clearly not being met? And feel free to kind of drop some of these answers if you want in the questions box again. Which of these is most clearly not being met under this scenario? Is it the use of the AI regulated activities, ability? You can just draw, you can do A, B, C, or D, by the way. Ability to demonstrate the record integrity, the traceability, the system control, use of electronic records instead of paper, speed and efficiency of the AI system. Let's see. What do y'all
Now
think?
we're paying attention, getting a lot of the correct response going on.
Wow, look at all those Bs. I love this. Yeah. I think you all are kind of on to us now. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. So response here, ability to demonstrate the record integrity, the traceability and system control. Absolutely. I think that everybody hit the nail right on the head. I'm really impressed actually. So yeah. Well done, everybody. All right.
Even those of you that selected multiple, you still selected B as well. So good job.
There's always an argument to be made, for could be sometimes we can be persuaded. But let's talk about the general business process, kind of shifting away, from the legal regulatory frameworks, requirements, and the other important part of the component, just the general business process. And I'll let you talk about this one in a little bit more detail, kind of what this looks like.
Thanks, Jen. I think this slide provides a good operating model for where AI shows up in business work. And so within everyday work, AI is helping with initial drafting, summarizing information, making classifications, providing internal recommendations. AI models are also, if you click Jen, and systems developed for internal use generate records as part of their design, configuration, training. We discussed that a little bit. Your general IT category for system configuration is probably going to cover that. Ongoing operations. I mean, we're even using it for coding now, and so pretty slick and cool that's if you have the knowledge to know where it's doing it incorrectly, to be able to use it that way. AI records are created when AI supports business decisions like we've already discussed, or actions. That can include the prompts, the inputs, outputs, system logs that document how the work was performed. And remember that it's the business process itself that drives the record's status, not the presence of AI. And so, Jen, if you click there, AI related information becomes a record when it provides evidence of operational activity, even if it's administrative, potentially. And then that final one, retention should align to the underlying business purpose. That could be HR administration, IT, compliance, whatever it may be, rather than treating all AI records as a standalone category. And so, yeah, I think that this is a good, just framework for a lot of the places where this is showing up, and it provides a couple of good, bullets at the bottom for how to deal with this information.
Yeah.
And I think it leads really well into an audience question that we had. Jen, do you want to tackle that one? This was a pre-submitted question.
This was a great pre-submitted question we got. So the question was, what's the general guidance in terms of records retention requirements, if any, for AI prompts, AI responses, or metadata about the prompts or responses? For example, financial services is heavily regulated, of course, primarily SEC, other current trends, best practices. I think this is a really great question. And, generally the records retention requirements for AI prompts, it really does straddle this line where probably the majority of the prompts that are being generated might be considered general business, potentially transitory, not requiring a longer term retention. And what we do see is, in most cases, organizations are developing kind of a policy approach for those where, for AI systems, especially one that's general, maybe business related in nature, they might be applying kind of a shorter term retention, something similar to collaborative platforms. Maybe it's a 30-day or a night. I think, I think 60, 90 days, 30 to 90, but maybe a little bit on the longer side is more about, what we're seeing. But, with the, idea that anything that might rise to a level of record that needs to be retained, whether it's for compliance, regulatory compliance purposes, or whatever that might be, that it is actually, there's a method to retain that record. Now, if it's a system, I think, going to the financial services or more heavily regulated, certainly certain systems that might be used for regulated activities, I think that policy would look different and more on, a conservative side where there would be a retention period set that was more in line with, what the compliance requirements might be. In financial services, I know like the Treasury has issued some guidelines, for example, like on financial modeling, if you're utilizing prompts and AI systems to develop that modeling, I think certainly the retention period would look different for those types of systems, maybe not subject to, the more the transitory or shorter retention periods in that case. So again, what is that system being used for primarily? Thinking about risks, thinking about the regulatory requirements, that kind of all goes into, what an appropriate approach would be for an organization and managing those different types of AI prompts, responses, metadata, et cetera. Okay, we've got moving into this discussion scenario number 4. So AI is used to help draft a quality investigation summary. The approved summary supports a documented decision. Someone suggests creating a new AI records retention category. How should retention for AI related content be determined under this scenario? And we've got a couple different responses here to think about, and you can drop your response in the questions box and we can talk about it. But do we keep all the AI content under one AI records category? Do we want to retain it based on the underlying business process, the purpose and risk, or retain only in the AI system is high risk, or use the shortest retention period available? Let's see what everybody is thinking here. Seeing a lot of B's. I like this comment. Context is king! Exclamation point. 100%. I like that. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of responses to B here. Man, I hope this wasn't a softball. If this wasn't too easy for y'all. But yeah, I think everybody is 100% right on. I think we're tracking. So retain based on the underlying business process, the purpose and risk. In context of the last audience question we just talked about with prompts and, heavily regulated industries, that risk component, I think, is something that is very important. And again, going back to kind of our, making these decisions and, our fundamental, lessons or principles in developing records retention policies and retention periods, make sure we have the right stakeholders involved in making those determinations. But yeah, certainly. Well, nice job, everybody. That's really impressive. I think we're all tracking pretty well. So why don't we get into kind of this meat here a little bit, and we'll talk about how do we categorize those AI records into your existing records retention schedule, and what does that process look like a bit more. So I think that our last question demonstrates that, everybody's kind of following this. We are agreeing that, retention should be based on the underlying business process, not necessarily the tool. We're not system focused. We're not focused on the tool necessarily in determining that retention period. And I think from a process perspective, we want to think about certainly the purpose. think we've driven this home probably enough, and I think everybody is completely on board with this, but there's no such thing really as a single AI category. That would be a big mistake. So the good news is, of course, you don't have to add an AI category to the retention schedule, similar to, any sort of, system. We are not focused on, we're keeping our schedule system agnostic. It's about the purpose and the processes that go along with this. And so the retention schedule really should, maintain and stay as that primary tool for determining how long your AI records should be retained. And, I think the practical steps of this is, number one, we're going to think about the business activity and the AI outputs that it supports. We want to find an existing category for that activity. And so we're thinking about, processes, appropriate retention periods, and finding those categories. And then, once that category aligns, we're applying that retention period for our, disposition purposes. And so, that content, the business purpose and risk level should drive the classification, and it should really kind of, maybe necessarily steer away from this idea that the focus is on the AI. We're really kind of going back to the basics, the fundamentals, as we do with other content. But, I'm not going to kind of, to beat around the bush. The challenge is that this is not always straightforward. I think in any case, we always get, questions about the retention schedule, kind of what's the best approach here, what's the best categories. And so I know organizations really are kind of tasked with identifying where AI records can fit into the existing categories. Again, this does require some collaboration with records management, IT, legal, the business units, business areas that are using the AI tools. But I think the really good news is that if your existing retention schedule is pretty inclusive, it's well structured, most AI records will naturally map to categories that you already have, with some exceptions that we'll talk about in a little bit here. And, oh, what was that, Rick?
Got a good question. Is it important to update your records retention schedule to include reference to AI records throughout? I do think it's important to selectively use some examples. You have to be careful though. I mean, just like email, you wouldn't want to just put emails as the example. Like you wouldn't want to just put prompts as an example somewhere, because that could become a, control find. Oh, I see prompts are here. I'm going to put all my prompts there. I would be specific about the records and define that example pretty well to ensure that people don't abuse it and think that it's a dumping ground for something like prompts.
Great. Yep, I agree with that. Well, we've got a discussion. I know we've got a few more slides here. We want to make sure we get through everything, but we've got a quick discussion. Scenario number 5, an organization uses an AI system to track system performance, creates logs, user access model activity, system changes. The same AI also helps approve customer refunds. How should these AI records be classified for retention purposes? Here's our options, everybody. Do we retain it all under an AI governance category? That's a freebie. B, logs follow the audit security, and then the decisions follow the customer or financial records. Retain all as IT system documentation, or retain based on the AI lifecycle, not the use. What does everybody think on this? Oh, we
Getting a
got
lot
some
of B's flowing in. Man, we liked B for the correct answers, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. I'm just realizing this.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's you're keying in on exactly the right thing. Logs align with audit and security categories. Decisions output align with customer financial transaction records. It's the same tool, multiple record types, multiple categories. That's just the reality. And so the practical takeaway is that categorization follows content and use, not the producing system. And that's true of AI, just like it's true of everything else.
Okay. Great. Well, nice job. And let's see, we've got some examples of the AI categories. So let's just talk about these and make sure that we have a chance to kind of get through this, because I know everybody is wanting some takeaways. What are some categories that we should really be focused on? What are some new categories in the retention schedules that we're seeing? So I'll let Rick kind of walk us through this.
Yeah, and I think this is a good kind of something that you can print off and use for reference because I think it covers a lot of the different AI record types. We're going to have a lot that go just under governance and compliance. Those impact assessments, anything related to policies, steering committees, maybe even related to general compliance, validation testing,
Mhm.
especially for high risk systems that are regulated. Regulatory
Well,
compliance.
I would say one thing on that, the AI governance compliance record, that this may be a new category just simply because it's dedicated to AI and there are very specific retention periods under the EU AI Data Act, just by the way.
Right. If you don't already have a governance and compliance category, you could create an AI specific one for this. I have seen some clients that we can kind of broaden their current governance category to cover it, but regulatory compliance, again, a lot of the validation testing, performance monitoring. Some of it's just going to be general regulatory compliance if you've got a category like that. Some is going to be regulated maybe on the quality side of things. If you've got those types of records, those types of processes. We're also going to have a lot of transitory AI. Inputs and outputs not relevant to business decisions or compliance considerations. Those are hopefully going to follow that non-record type category and be used while they're useful and then deleted pretty quickly. Likely, depending on your industry, you're going to have some content specific, aligned with customer things, maybe security if you're in a highly regulated atmosphere, accounting processes within the retention schedule if those are heavily regulated for you. And then we've talked a lot about these IT system records. That's just going to be general configuration, system documentation, making sure that the system is working appropriately. And then also there could be regulated systems involved in that as well. And so you'll probably have unique specific categories to cover those. And then finally, audit logs and access histories, they're probably going to align with many of your existing audit categories and or security categories. Again, the retention follows the category, not necessarily the tool or system that produces the information. So I think we have time. We had another audience question. Jen, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, let's see here. So,
You want me to read it?
yeah, if you could, that'd be great.
It would be helpful to see what the audit trail looks
Mm.
like, a sample example, and any discussion around how they get produced in litigation alongside how actual AI searches results get produced.
Yeah, okay. This was a great question, and we actually went to our software team to kind of ask about this because we manage our own AI systems internally for various reasons. Also, as a component of our VR software, has AI systems as part of it as well. And the answer was it just really kind of depends on the system itself and kind of the different components that are being tracked. But essentially, I think an audit trail will show, and it's kind of when we looked at our internal ones, which we can't share just because it has user data, but a lot of different data points there, and it will touch on different pieces that will speak to data integrity, incidents, all these different things. And so unfortunately, we can't really share a great example, and I don't know if it would be helpful just because it can look so different depending. If it's a very high regulated, high risk system, I think there would be a lot more data points that would be tracked as part of that, for example. And for litigation readiness in what's actually produced, you will see a document that traces all of these different data points to kind of demonstrate the accountability and all those different aspects. So I wish we could share one, but it really does kind of depend. So All right, we've got one more, I think, final poll question before hopefully we can just address a couple of these questions that came up. I'm going to ask everybody this: a scenario organization maintains 2 AI systems. One supports the quality decisions subject to formal validation, regulatory oversight. The second supports general business operations, is not regulated. And let's see what we've got here. How should the records for each be handled? This is kind of another split scenario, I think, here, just kind of testing if how we would track this. I feel pretty confident in everybody.
This one was tricky. Seems like the people that answered early, you know, initially went with a gut reaction that may not have been correct. Okay, there's the results.
Okay.
Ultimately, the majority went with the answer that we were looking for. Best answer C.
Great. Wow.
So apply governance to the regulated system, apply business or operational categories to the non-regulated system. A, B, and D miss it slightly. Same retention for both, ignores a little bit of risk there. IT only categorization ignores the regulatory obligation, and treating non-regulated as transitory potentially ignores some legitimate operational value. So, but it's tricky, you know. I mean, I think each of these can be argued one way or another. So.
Well, great. Well, I know we're at time. We had some really great questions, and I think
Yeah,
we
thanks
can,
everyone.
if anybody has any other questions after this, please feel free to submit them. We're happy to answer them, and we'll kind of get back on these questions too that we didn't get a chance to get to in the question box. But yeah, it was great. Thank you everybody for joining, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we hope to see you at our next virtual coffee. We'll be releasing the details on that and information here shortly. So looking forward to it.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.